Recording in progress. All right. Another episode, another part of the Grand Lodge Candidate Series, round 2022. We did this last year. We're doing it again. All candidates are welcome, and I hope that you will get in touch with me and join me on the podcast. Um, you know, Soaring Compass, we're not endorsing any one particular candidate, but we do want to talk to them all to learn just about their Masonic journey and where they see the craft going and all that good jazz. And with that, Right Worshipful Brother Tom Haight is joining us. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Cameron. Good to be here.
So let's start with the basics. Tell me, which lodge or lodges of which you're a member and your current positions within Freemasonry.
Yeah, my mother lodge is Corinthian Lodge No. 330 in London West. I also belong to Templum Lucis, number 747, and a traditional observant lodge. I'm a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason in the London Valley. I'm past Grand Chaplain. I started my term in 2019 and ended in 2021, although it seemed like half a year since COVID struck in the middle of my year. Leadership means you deal with what you get, not with what you thought you were going to get. It was a different journey than I expected, but it was good, and it continues to be good.
That's an interesting quote. I've heard it in different formats. The idea of leadership. I've heard in terms of, I once heard it in terms of war. You go to war with the army you have, not the army you want, right? The idea of you lead with the circumstances that you have, not with the circumstances that you want necessarily. But that does bring up, I think, a very good question about Freemasonry right now and Grand Lodge. And this really, I think, applies to Freemasonry globally. What is leadership from a Masonic perspective when you're talking about, for example, a Grand Lodge? And what is the role of Grand Lodge as a leader in relation to lodges and districts and the craft?
Well, Cameron, I think leadership is going to take a bit of a slightly different turn as we come out of COVID. There are a number of lodges, and as I traveled around, I'm a big traveler. I find that some members, including worshipful masters, are saying, I didn't get my full year in. They expected to punch the buttons, you get 10 meetings, you do so many degrees, you get your year done. But leadership isn't that. That may be the plan when you went in, but when things change, you have to change. A good example for me personally, recently I changed my drug regime for diabetes, and I was hoping it would work out. It didn't. I had to change it again because what happened? I lost 40 pounds. Yay. And I had to change my blood pressure medication to bring it all back in line. Same thing with a lodge. You think you're going to do something and you plan it out and you need to do that, but you have to be ready to shift when those shifts happen. If I were master of a lodge and the lodge burned down, the building, my year would be much different than I anticipated. And I think coming out of COVID, this is what we're going to find. We're going to have to work with. I come from a lodge in London of history of we do our own work, but we're going to call upon many others to help us doing our work as people fall because of COVID and have to step out at the very last minute. That's the type of leadership that requires flexibility. And that, I think, is the leadership that the board and Grand Lodge needs to mentor and encourage to help us grow out of this pandemic.
Interesting. My pops had that very thing happen to him. He was master for the first time in 1995 of his lodge, and there was a fire, and he lost his lodge building. He ended up having to, or temple, I suppose I should say. He ended up moving to another temple, and they eventually amalgamated with the lodge that was meeting at the other temple. So those things happen, and yeah, adaptability is a very important trait for life and leadership. Do you think Freemasonry is capable of adaptability. Very early in my Masonic career, I was cranky about not being able to do something I wanted to do, and an older Mason told me Freemasonry advances one funeral at a time, basically saying just wait a few years till the old guys are gone, and then you can kind of get your stuff through. Which, there's some truth to the statement, and I think in life, almost everything advances one funeral at a time. Do you think Freemasonry, though, is capable of adaptability and growth?
I think adaptability in Freemasonry is one of the keys that has kept us around for over 3 centuries. Our ritual remains pretty much the same, but we adapt it to the needs. For one of the things that attracted me to Freemasonry is the idea that our ritual allows each man to come into the craft and do his work to find the center, to find that place where he cannot err. And when other people try to push their center on a new Mason, the old guys that need to pass away, and watch it because I'm becoming an old guy, that's okay. But everybody comes in and every generation comes in. The ritual remains the same, but its structure is such that we can all do our own work, even at the same time. I'm still amazed that occasionally, after more than 2 decades in the craft, I will hear something when I'm visiting a lodge and the penny will drop for me. And I'll go, I've heard it several, probably hundreds of times, but it's at that moment that I say, the great architect of the universe has said, Tom, now's your moment to understand this piece of the ritual. And so part of it's patience. I think one of the other things in Masonry, and this alludes to your dad, we very rarely see the beginning, the middle, and the end of something. I'll go back when I was master and going through the chairs. I was an early adopter of email, but we couldn't send summons out by email. Grand Lodge told us that. Well, we can send summons out by email now. And eventually there'll be another method of communication, perhaps after I'm gone, to communicate. Most of my work in Masonry, I'm going to see the middle bits, the middle parts. But there was stuff that was started by my brothers in the 50s who were groaning about the old guys back in the 50s, and it's now come to pass, perhaps in the early 2000s. One thing the pandemic's done is it's certainly accelerated our understanding of virtual meetings and virtual education, which I'm a big proponent of.
Yeah, and I know that you're involved in a lot of the virtual education and in the virtual meetings places, bringing Freemasonry more into the virtual realm. Tell me a little bit about that and what you have coming up in regard to the virtual side of the craft, especially of education.
Well, I'm part of a group of 3 guys that run the Templum Lucis speaker series. I also run speaker events for my mother lodge in London. Templum Lucis speakers meet once a month. We try to bring in top quality speakers. This month, we'll be bringing in Brother Mark Perrow, a professor at MIT. He's spoken at my lodge. He is a mathematician and an IT guy, and an excellent speaker. Same thing, when we brought the education in, we didn't say, well, it's only going to be esoteric, or it's only going to be ritual, or it's only going to be, we structured our meetings so we could invite brothers who were brand new, people who were thinking of joining the craft, and we have even invited and enjoy the company of the Order of Women Freemasons around the globe. It's kind of fun to have a meeting when you realize that one member, Gordon, is in New Zealand and it's 3:00 in the afternoon in New Zealand when it's 7:00 here in Canada. It really warps your mind a bit. And then you have another fellow in Nairobi and somebody else in Greece and Britain. It shrunk the world. Honest to God, in masonry, for me, it shrunk the world. Um, if I had to bring those speakers here, we might bring one a year or every other year because of budget concerns. Now we can have them live speaking virtually, and we can really enjoy what they have to say and learn from one another. God knows every time I do a speaker, I learn more, and my own sense of what masonry about drops deeper. That would be one of my hopes as well. Education will mean we will go deeper. We have many members who are great masons, but they don't go very deep. And I really take to light that I think if we make good men better, everything else will be a consequence of that.
What is a great mason?
Hmm?
What is a great mason?
I could name some. A great mason, I think, is someone who goes about doing the work that needs to be done, doesn't necessarily draw attention to himself, but is willing to accept it if it comes, but quietly goes about doing the business. And when the work is done, sets down that set of working tools and perhaps picks them up to work on another project, on another charity, on another group. A good mason is also someone who's a mason 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We say at the end of the meetings, we quit this retreat of friendship and brotherly love, but masonry continues. And even in the ritual, if you listen to it, it's closed tiled, not closed with a D as in door shut, but we're closing this part and we're going back out into the world. Our monthly meetings are a celebration of what we do day to day. And if I asked you, Cameron, how many guys have just slipped someone a little bit of money or help them out or rake the yard, good men do good work and don't seek applause.
Is there, or to what extent is there a place in Freemasonry at the lodge level, at the Grand Lodge level, pick your level. At what place is there to what extent is there a place in Freemasonry to call people out if they're not being great masons? And I'm not speaking necessarily of there's if a guy's breaking the law or does something that's obviously immoral or wrong or something to that extent, that's one thing that has to be dealt with. But the guy who you never see for 30 years type of deal, right? The guy who pays his dues but pays them late. If the guy who those type of things, it seems like, and I'll admit you caught me, I know I scheduled this weeks ago, but I'm in a cranky mood today, so this might get a bit cranky as we go. But to what extent is there in Freemasonry to call some of that stuff out as opposed to just letting it all kind of go?
I think you need to work with every man quietly and individually. Speaking of dues, I'm a lodge secretary. I have several boys I work with. If a man says I need a little more time, the lodge I'm secretary of, we have the capacity to do that financially. If you don't have the capacity to do it financially, then you have to handle it differently.
But what if it's
If
not
it's an
so much
issue,
that they cite, not so much that they tell you? What if it's just they ghost you? You don't hear from them for, say, almost a full year, and then the last moment they pay their dues for that year type of thing, and you didn't hear from them for the entirety of the year, or again they don't show up to lodge or whatever it is.
well, my role in life is always to forgive people. So I want to forgive them. I want to welcome them back. And I know that if I get angry with them, I'll just push them away. Perhaps one of the reasons they didn't show up is they took that piece in the first degree that says if you're at variance with a brother, you should not attend lodge for a period of time, one or both of you. So it's good to understand that people have different reasons. I could look at well, a fellow that has cancer or heart issues. Old guys have health issues. Young fellows, and my lodge in London's relatively young, they have things like I became a new father. I need to take a bit of time off to tend to my baby. What am I going to say to that man? He maybe got a little embarrassed, maybe he got a little uncomfortable because he was going to take time off. Just be upright and for it, upright and say, you know, brother, I need to take some time off. Here are my dues. You won't see me a lot, but I'll try and get there when I can. We all go through those periods in life. I'm lucky, in spite of my story of adjusting medications. I'm reasonably healthy. And yet I can look at my brothers who are 10 years older than me, 15 years older, who are going through a lot of struggles. And they need to stay home. COVID has meant a lot of different things. There's some people who haven't gotten vaccinated, their choice. I accept that. We'll miss them in lodge for a bit longer. There will be those who've been fully vaccinated but have family members that are at risk and will not come out because they don't want to share COVID with their family member. I have to accept that with graciousness. That's a tough one on leadership, though, because you got to have more than one guy ready to do the degree parts, ready to do the job in case you have a bunch all of a sudden fall out. It's adaptability again. Same degrees, same work, but every brother has to be adaptable, and every lodge master, lodge secretary has to be adaptable and forgiving of those who need to make shifts in their life at various times. I have another brother who spent 20 years out of the craft because he got on permanent afternoons for 20 years. Still paid his dues, still came back when he got to semi-retirement and back on a day shift. I guess the question is, can we be patient enough with our brothers to let them do the work they need to do for themselves?
And I've been seeing this trend forever. Pre-COVID. I remember pre-COVID, whenever I would try to call somebody out, the response I always got was, you have to be understanding. They have family, they have a wife, they have kids, they have a job. And it's like, well, should I just go in the corner and screw myself? Because I'm the one you always call when you need me to take a spot. And I guess what really hurt, somebody brought up a scholarship that their son had received from the lodge. And it's like, okay, great. If we can't get quorum and we can't meet, who gets the scholarship then? Your kid got it, so I guess screw the next generation of kids, right? And it's like, there's only so, Freemasonry can do so much good, but it can't do good if the lodges go dark because people don't show up. And if we don't call people out sooner or later and say, if you're not here, we can't function. I'm sorry you have a wife. I'm sorry you have a kid. I'm sorry you have a job. I'm sorry for whatever it is that's keeping you from lodge, but we will go dark if you don't show up. And if you miss 20 years and show 20 years later, what message does that send to everybody else? That they too can leave for 20 years and not come back. Like, it's not a game, you know? It just, I was so hurt.
And I think for that, you have to work with the people you have. I hear your deep, deep frustration. And this is one of the things coming out of COVID that I think is so important. We need guys to come to lodge, seriously, because we're going to have, I even think for the next 3-5 years, people are going to overly monitor. You know, if I had a sniffle but didn't think I had a full-blown cold or the flu, I would go to lodge. Now I think a lot of guys are saying it's best if I stay home. but we need to have the leadership come back. We need the leaders to lead. In my own district, my master was saying that a lot of the masters are frustrated because they didn't get the year they wanted. I say again, it's about leadership. You got to deal with what you get, not with what you wanted. You know, and it's a challenge. I will tell you, it's a challenge. We need older members. I function a lot at church, and I love my older members, but all it takes is one negative guy who just says, "When I was a young man," it's just not the same. It wasn't the same for me. It was my father's generation. And in that generation, men all worked and most mothers stayed home. They had 5 managers. Now with computers, they have 2. Now with equality in the workspace, one of the managers is a woman. All of that's great, but it changes the dynamic. So you can't say back in my day. Have you heard that one, Cameron? Back in my day. Ladies' nights. I think the other thing is I encourage my brother, a ladies' night can be 10 couples gathering in a nice restaurant in a separate room, sharing what we do with our ladies. I grew up in an era in the 70s, 80s, where ladies' nights was 300 people, 150 couples, and you hired a DJ and a dance hall and a catered meal, and you had to sell tickets. It could be as simple as the lodge saying, let's get together and talk with one another.
Yeah, you need those things for sure. You're absolutely right. Whether it be ladies' nights or softball games, or we do softball in our district. You need those things for sure. But even those things. So, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? To do ladies' nights, you need people to volunteer to do the ladies' nights. To get people to volunteer to the ladies' night, they need to show up to lodge to organize things, right? I mean, I guess not. Theoretically, they could do all their work outside of lodge and send a, committee report to the master to read out, or to the secretary to read out on behalf of the committee, but that's not quite the same thing as actually being present. And then you got to sell the event. So that means visiting other lodges in the district,
Yeah.
other lodges in your area, to be like, okay, so maybe that means you're out 5 nights a week. And maybe if your wife is mad at you, that's just too bad. Because if it's a ladies' night and you want to do it, you got to do it. I just,
You got to do the work. But
it doesn't
but
seem
like I say,
sustainable to me.
when I was I was master, so I think Craig was junior warden, and I said, why don't we have a bowling for benevolence? Or we didn't. We were playing pool. And I said the guys can wear their tuxedos, and we'll get the ladies to dress in beautiful gowns, and we'll shoot pool at Palisade, which had in London, which had a bowling alley as well. And we pretended to be Bond and Bond women. It was a good night. And we raised some money. Not a lot, but it was a good night.
And those nights are wonderful. And I think that's a great idea. And hopefully people watching this, if you're in a Masonic lodge, things like that will inspire you to either do a bowling night or do something else, but in that vein, social events and social nights that involve both the lodge brethren and their ladies and their families and their friends, and getting a lot of people out. I'm worried about the sustainability of an organization in which it feels as though there's no responsibilities. Like you can miss 20 years and show up and it's fine, right? Like that. I'm not sure how sustainable that is anymore. I think it was sustainable in the 1920s after that first big boom period of the craft, and even the 1950s, because you had so many guys that if one or two miss, there's other people to take their place, especially if they're an officer. We're at this stage now, and I even see with burnout amongst officers, they are so busy trying to make sure their lodges can function that they burn out quick because they don't have the same level of help and depth of support they had perhaps in the 1950s. You look at some of those old registries, it's a business meeting would get 75 people, just a business meeting. Now, at the meeting, the worship master was holding his breath, or the acting worship master was holding his breath because he didn't know if he'd get quorum. He didn't know if he'd have enough people to open. Like, I just don't know how sustainable that is unless we start as leaders, maybe calling people out and not being so quick to just, be understanding necessarily of them not attending. But I'm cranky today, so that might just be me. You're probably more right than I am.
That's okay. One of the things I did when I was going up through the chair, I was master in 04. I invited some of the older brothers and their wives to my house for dinner. And we sat down at the table and had dinner together and chatted about anything and nothing. Some touched on lodge, some touched on history, some touched on. Those fellows still come back and talk to me. They're getting thinner because most of them have passed away. One of my good mentors, Don Watson, who I really enjoyed, he had a way of conveying stuff to me. He would say to me, Tom, in 1968, when I was worshipful master, we tried this, and this was the result. He didn't tell me I couldn't do it. He didn't tell me I would get the same result. He just shared with me the result. Too many past masters want to say, we did it in 1960 and it didn't work. It won't work now. Well, it's a different age. We have computers now. I actually, to be honest, and I'm a secretary, so I want to save a buck. I went visiting a Mason in the Veterans Hospital in London, and he had the monthly summonses pinned to his bulletin board. You can't do that with an email.
Well, there is.
So there are some. I print some. Trust me, I print a bunch, which I get criticized for, but that's okay. Because I just think it's important for people to sometimes have that physical summons.
There is studies, because I, for the 100th anniversary of the Windsor Masonic Temple and of Harmony Lodge, which meets at the Windsor Masonic Temple, I created postage stamps from the Canadian Canada Post Personal Stamp Program, where any lodge can do it, any Mason can do it. They can, take a picture of their lodge emblem or temple or whatever it is and put it on a stamp and have them printed off. And they're good. They're good for postage in Canada, but that got me thinking about Masonic postage stamps and, using perhaps outdated, some would call forms of communication to reach the brothers. And I looked at all sorts of studies that indicated direct mail, like physical letters, is far more effective than email in terms of reaching people. People are far more likely to open and read a letter they get in the mail than an email, because we're just so inundated with emails now and things can get lost in junk folders. And, I've argued it might be worth considering, at least at the lodge level, not every month, because it would cost a lot of money, but maybe twice a year doing a mass mail out as opposed to always relying on an email, because there is evidence that regular mail, snail mail is more effective at reaching people, and even past Grand Master Alan J. Petrosar, he created a personalized stamp during his term as Grand Master, which he used. So maybe there's something to, in this case, adaptability would be adapting back to something that was maybe perhaps, in the past, but more tried and true snail mail. But yeah, I think there's definitely a place for physical copies of things and things you can hold and send out in mail.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing is I have a lot of coins. They're okay. But I always want to say to the boys, choose something that's visible. So for 150th anniversary fundraiser for my lodge in London, purchased a bunch of toques. navy toques with the square and compass and the red maple leaf, and sang Corinthian Lodge number 330 GRC, celebrating 150 years in 2025. I did it because we still shovel our drives, and if we wear the toque while we're shoveling the drive, someone might ask that question. I always wondered about masonry, didn't know how to join. Are we ready? I had another friend that turns out he went to school with my daughter. Great mason, just became a master mason right before the shutdown. And he joined another group I belonged to in London called the Baconian Club. And on a rainy night when he didn't have a raincoat, I was giving him a ride home. He's about 3 blocks from where we meet. And he says, "Oh, I'm a Baconian past president now. I just have to find how to become a mason." So I naturally slipped my hand into my pocket and pulled out the application. Are we ready to do that?
That's a good question. I guess, what do you think the answer is? Are we ready to start, bringing guys in? I know we're trying, lodges are having degrees again. Do you think do you think lodges are sufficiently prepared? It's been relatively recent that we've started meeting in person again. And even on a mass level, just do you think Freemasonry is ready to start accepting new members?
Sure. My lodges are.
And
I will say my lodge in London, where I'm secretary, my mother lodge, the average age of the progressive chair is 35.
so there's ready in the sense of doing the work, right? Making sure you have sufficient bodies to do the degrees, and the different parts. And then there's ready in the sense of when those people join, um, will they want to come back to lodge? Will they have the idea of like retention, right? It's not just creating a mason, because and we've seen it, you've seen it, right? The term we use sometimes is $400 masons, or depending what your initiation fee is, right? They come once and never come back. I call them empty aprons. That's not something I think anybody wants either, is that. So do you think it's not just about ready to do the degrees, but ready to make sure that when a new candidate becomes a mason, there's infrastructure in place to make sure he comes back and stays an active part of the lodge?
That's responsibility of the sponsors. And too many sponsors, just a couple of guys want to just sponsor like 100 guys. That's all they do. Sponsor mill. Go back, give them a phone call, write them a letter, write them a thank you note, send them a Christmas card. Christmas cards are rare these days. Real Christmas cards. Not the electronic ones. To me, it's be a friend. How do you make a man a good man? You make a friend. You sponsor him in the craft, and you deepen the friendship.
Is that
Which brings me to, I guess, a little point for me is travel. We laugh a lot, about visiting, and visit outside of the districts, because one of the best ways to learn more and deepen more is to sit in a car with 4 masons and travel somewhere around an hour to go to a lodge, because the conversations to and from lodge are where we deepen and strengthen our friendships. This past Wednesday, I went to Niagara number 2. I'm living in Aurora now. And I went with the Grand Chaplain, Paul Tager, and the Grand Junior Warden, George Ashram, and Matt Winder, from Brampton. And I see the question I posed in the car to the fellas on the way is, just as an idea, what in where you grew up, what did your mothers can preserve? Well, George is from Lebanon. So it's fig jam. Matt Winder's from India, and there's a type of part of the orange family, but it's a bitter orange, and so marmalade. And Paul Jagger, who is the Grand Chaplain, also Sikh, he said, "Well, I know what you did, Paul, because you were born and raised in Brantford. You made strawberry jam and raspberry jam just like I did in St. Thomas. No different than you, Cameron." It's but what is our history when we talk about it? What is the things that we have done and brought with us? And just simple things like, what did we learn when we were little boys, stirring the jam pot, as I recall doing, and of course, licking the spoon when it cooled down. Um, so some of those are good questions to ask.
Well, and I think there's a couple of things in there. I think you're absolutely right. We don't visit as much as we should. Masons, visiting and traveling is such a critical part of the craft. If you're not traveling to other lodges, you're really doing yourself a disservice in terms of your Masonic career, and you're doing the craft a disservice as well, because other lodges might need your help, and you might get ideas from the other lodges that you can bring back to yours.
Yeah.
Even on those car rides, you in conversation might come up with an idea in the car ride that could benefit your lodge or lodges. So, not traveling really does a disservice, I think, to yourself and to the craft.
So I thought I was traveling. I have a hotel. That's the picture behind me is the hotel I own. But I was traveling up north and they were doing a ballot. And this lodge, which is Strong Lodge in Sundridge in the South River, and they have a charge that they use before they ballot. So let me just, I think there's wisdom in this. The worshipful master shall cause the following charge to be read. Every member present is expected to vote, nor can he be excused from the discharge of this important duty. All brethren must therefore come to the performance of his trust with firmness, candor, and full determination to do right, to allow no personal timidity to forbid the deposit of a black ball if the applicant is unworthy, and no illiberal prejudice to prevent the deposition of a white ball if the character and qualification of the candidate are unobjectionable. The great object of the ballot is to secure the independence of the voter, and for this purpose, its secrecy should be inviolable. No members can be called upon to account for the ballot he has deposited. No member shall find fault or complain with the result of the ballot, for so by doing so, he declares that he did not blackball the applicant, and should all members who voted with white balls thus complain or find fault, the brother having cast the black ball would be exposed and the secrecy of the ballot would be destroyed. When an applicant has been rejected, he is to be notified by the secretary, and the matter should remain a profound secret between the members of the fraternity and the applicant. It's a gross Masonic offense for any member to make public the action of the lodge in rejecting an applicant. And that lodge reads that charge every time they vote. And I sometimes think I'd like to bring that kind of charge to all lodges.
It's a good charge, and it sounds about right in terms of what can be expected.
I've been there. I've been there where I walk out the door and the guy that doesn't like the results of the ballot is surveying everybody.
Oh yeah, I think we've all seen that. I think we've all seen that, and it's unfortunate. We do live in the real world, though, I suppose. I mean, there is always a danger of somebody blackballing a candidate for illiberal reasons. It's always possible, though you'd hate to see it. I guess would be a reason to survey and figure it out, I suppose. But you want to have faith in your brother that they're making choices based on, blackballing or whiteballing based on the right reasons, as opposed to any illiberal or concerns that way. I think it's probably correct. It's probably good. It's a good charge and a good thing for brothers to keep in mind when they're voting, Uh, and really, I suppose in a lot of ways on almost anything, right? Because candidates is one thing, and that's, kept private for a reason. But even I've been to lodges where there's been a vote on, a matter of budget or emotion or whatever it is, where it doesn't go the way somebody wants it to go. And then there's all sorts of crankiness and fighting about it after the fact. And people, asking, why'd you vote this way? Why'd you vote that way? And, it's important, I think, for lodges to remember that also in any vote that, a brother, once he's a brother, he is entitled to vote his conscience. And if if you make a motion and it doesn't pass, or you oppose a motion that does pass, right, you got to find a way to still work within the lodge and with each other, despite any hard feelings over, issues of direction the lodge goes.
And that's that's one of the secrets of Masonry. We are all shaped by one another. One of the greatest gifts from Masonry for me is they're not all professional people. They're not all, if I join a union in Windsor in an automobile shop, they're all union members. And not all union members think alike. Not all lawyers think alike. Not all doctors think alike. But in the craft, I meet everybody. And that's a true joy. I wouldn't fix a car. It just doesn't come out of my fingers. So I love guys who can fix cars. And because they're a Mason, I know they're going to give me a fair deal. One of my comments always in every dealing, whether it's a brother Mason or not, is I want the best deal you can give me, but I want you in business 18 months from now.
And, this idea of not everybody thinks alike, not everybody is alike, it goes to what I've come to absolutely despise in Freemasonry now is not the lecture itself, but I think the way it's so misinterpreted, the apron charge of the first degree. So many times I've either had somebody approach me themselves, or I've heard secondhand, I can't sit in lodge with this person because he put some stuff on Facebook and I don't like it. And my apron charge says I can't sit with him in lodge. Right. Or I find after the fact there was a kerfuffle in the lodge, two guys are in disagreement. So one of them, decides to join another lodge or demit out of the craft altogether or whatever it is. Or there's and it's like, how it's such an immature way to interpret that lecture. There are plenty of people I don't like that I work with in my day-to-day life in order to get whatever it needs to be done, right? There are some things that's more important than how you feel. So this idea of I don't like this person, therefore, it's like, well, do you not work with people you don't like? Do you not have family members you maybe don't like, but you get together at Christmas or Thanksgiving? This idea of I'm having a spat or this person said something I don't like, so I'm just going to leave, which I've seen it happen. I'm just going to demit altogether. Like, I don't understand where that idea comes from. You don't even have to like a lodge brother. It's fine if you don't like him, so long as you can sit quietly in a room with him and make sure the lodge business gets done. The lodge is more important than how you feel. I don't understand that idea of, and I just like what you said, people can think differently. It's okay. It's okay to have different thoughts, different ideas, right? All that's being asked of you is that you work with that brother for 2 hours in order to get the business meeting done or to get the degree done, right? Because then it's not about you, it's about the candidate who's coming up. I just think that apron charge has been so misinterpreted to mean, I can't sit with this person if I have a disagreement with them, or even if I don't like him. And it's like, no, you can be mature enough to make it work. I don't get it. It drives me crazy. People can think differently and still get along in lodge. And it's one of those things. I don't understand it.
There are things that will bother you for a couple of moments, and will you even think of it next week? Let it go. It's gone. There are very few things that are so profound that I would separate myself from any one of my brothers. Very, very few. And just to quarrel over how a vote went, it went, you know. And if the body of the lodge collectively said, we're voting on this, and I disagreed, I voted elsewise, well, I have to live with the will of the people, the will of the lodge. Let it go. There's very, very few things in life that are ever going to profoundly bother me deeply enough to leave lodge. But yeah, Cameron, you're right. There's lots of guys. And what I would say is now we're dealing with a mason whose masonry goes an inch deep because their masonry went to their center where you cannot air a 90-degree angle. The stuff that's bothering them at an inch won't bother them. They'll get over it. Again, I've got it. One of the things in traveling, and I travel with the Grand Master, Most Worshipful Brother David Cameron. And one of the phrases I learned, not in masonry, but as I shared with him when we were coming back, and I said, I learned when I travel this phrase, must be a local custom, and let it go.
I really like what you said. Their masonry is an inch deep. I like that expression a lot. Never heard that before.
We need more. We need masons where their masonry goes a mile deep or more.
And and it's okay because heaven knows, I can be angry and mad and hurt, and it's okay to be passionate. One of my best friends in the craft, well, just one of my favorite people in or outside the craft, but I met him through the craft. Worship Brother Michel Broussard. He's a really great guy, but him and I have been into it, and I've yelled at him, and then he's yelled at me on more than a few occasions. But once it's done, and we can still work together in lodge and move past it, because the most important thing is making sure the lodge functions well. So it's okay to be. I'm not saying guys can't have disagreements or be angry with each other or even have it outside of lodge, but it doesn't mean once it's done, and you move on. You don't have to. I just don't understand it. It's like you said, it must be perhaps with Michelle and I, the masonry goes a bit deeper than an inch, but with some of these guys, maybe the first fight, they walk away. And I've never understood that idea.
But they're like the scrub cedar trees. The roots don't go very deep. And when the big windstorm comes up and blows across the sands of Lake Huron, they get ripped out of the ground.
That's a good analogy too. Good way to look at it, right?
A good solid maple tree has deep roots and stays put.
I want to go back way, to near the start of this interview. We're talking about, being ready for applicants, not just in terms of being able to put on a degree, but being ready in terms of making sure that those applicants who then become masons then become active masons and return to lodge. And you mentioned, I think you're right. I think you're 90% right on that. You said primarily it's the fault of the sponsors not making sure that they, send them Christmas cards, keep in touch. But to what extent also might there be some blame for the lodge infrastructure, especially the worshipful master, perhaps, or some of those higher officers, maybe taking the time to investigate not just the candidate, but the sponsors too, and asking the sponsors, like, do you know this guy? Are you sponsoring him just because you want to bring him in? Like, how well do you know this mason? And making sure that the sponsors understand what it means to sponsor somebody and to be that signature on an application that gets that person through the West Gate.
So there would be a piece where Grand Lodge could create a piece of education. I'm suggesting part of a larger day, but 2 hours perhaps, how to be an effective sponsor. We don't teach it. We don't train it. We don't say, come to lodge, visit us. We don't, there's nothing saying we can't invite somebody to our festive board before or after lodge. We can do that. There's nothing to say at a social event we couldn't have a social event and invite somebody that's interested to go to the social event. 2019 was our first annual in London show and shine car show at the Masonic Center in London. And it's the only first annual because we've been shut down since. Guys like cars, let's face it. And they like to show off the cars they own. And if we don't own a classic, we like to go see them. So it's a male-oriented social event. You don't have to be a Mason to come, but you get to interact and see us doing our work. In that event, we raise money for autism locally. We could remind the brethren that this is what it means. It's not about getting the application. It's about getting a committed applicant. And once they come through the doors and get their first degree, then we have to have a solid direction saying it may take 3 months to get your next degree. It might take 6 months, or in our lodge, we have a first degree, and then 6 months later, you're eligible for your second, and 6 months after your second, you're eligible for your third. We get to make those rules in the lodge instead of rushing people through. And it has to be done on the time frame of the person. I had a wonderful email come to me last August, and it was from my brother's secretary in a Scottish Constitution Lodge, and his son was going to be studying at Western, and could he come and perhaps he might affiliate and we would do his third degree. So the young man's 22. He was a Lewis. That's under the Grand Lodge of Scotland. He's got a second degree, and he's from Fiji. He wins the award for the furthest traveled.
He would win that award for sure. I think it's pretty far. I've won that award a couple times. Unofficially, it's no official award, but I've got it a few times. Missouri.
Yeah.
I got it.
Yeah. I got it in Barbados.
That's a good trip. That's a good trip. That's for sure. I got it in Mexico.
So what I'm saying is travel. And when you sponsor someone, just don't say, okay, he's done. Follow up with him. Help him with his degree work.
But again, this goes to, I think, maybe that this is kind of the problem that I was trying to address at the start to a certain extent. You know, when you have a sponsor and you like, what if the response from the sponsor is, well, I'm busy, I can't follow up with him, I can't do his degree work, I can't be at his degrees, I have a wife and kids, I have this, I have that. Like, I think that's the challenge, is how do we, because you're absolutely right, sponsors need to follow up with the people they sponsor, the Masons, the applicants and the Masons they sponsor. And that might mean, you know, putting in more time with them beyond just lodge meetings. And that is going to mean, you know, it should mean going to their degrees. Certainly their first, but really they should be at all three. But if they come back and say, I had to work, wife said stay home, I was tired, whatever it is they come back with, like, I think that's the challenge, is being a sponsor, being a Mason takes a lot of work. And in 2022, with the way society is changing and with everything else, is it still possible to expect that work from the average Mason? Or is there just too much in life right now that's going to keep them away from lodge and keep them away from that work?
If you set the bar low, that's what you'll get. And they'll just step over it. Set the bar higher. I believe the classic story came out of the rebellion of 1776. He's speaking as a Canadian. And the flag boy had the flag 200 yards ahead of the line. And they said, bring the flag back. And the flag boy said, bring the line forward. Set the flag in the ground and move towards the flag. Don't keep pulling the flag backwards. You need 2 signatures on the sponsor's form. It's not to say you couldn't have a 3rd or 4th. There are times I sat around a table and it's a discussion is who's going to sponsor them, who's going to be the second sponsor. There's no reason that even if you have a second sponsor, that the other guys sitting around the table that know the same man couldn't be part of a sponsorship group.
That's a good point. I never heard anybody suggest it, but you're right. There's nothing written down that says the sponsor, you limit sponsorship to 2. And it's a really good point, why not have a 3rd or 4th sponsor? That you're making it more likely that at least somebody will be able to keep in touch with. If the first 2 sponsors are whatever, can't make it out for whatever reason or can't support their guy, you've got 2 more that can, type of thing.
Yeah. And things like go support the man. If his man plays minor hockey, go join him someday when he's at a hockey rink and sit in the stands with him and drink hot coffee and freeze your butt off on those bloody awful seats in a minor hockey rink. But you'll chat to one another as you're watching his son play hockey.
No, I agree completely. There's nothing wrong with that stuff. I just wish it happened more, but it doesn't seem to happen as much as I'd like it to. But those things should be done, So when I was worshipful master, I went to see if one of my applicants, if a Mason who was under me, let's say his wife was involved in a play or in a theater and he was selling tickets, I'd always, buy a ticket and go see the play, and stuff like that, right? Like, you want to do as much as you can to support the Mason in and out of the lodge. And if that means you get less sleep, you get less sleep. I don't think, I think, you don't always need 8 hours of sleep. You'll be fine with 5. Go to the minor hockey game, right? Why not?
Yeah. Why not? It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And then maybe afterwards you go out and the gang's there and the hockey, the boys are all going off to Boston Pizza or something like that. And the fathers and likely some mothers are gathered at another table. That's how you get to know each other. One of the illustrations I always use with a lot of people, and I use this with my brothers. When Prince William and Catherine came out of the hospital with little George in their arms, first-time parents, and all the news commentators from BBC and CBC and CTV are saying, I wonder what they're thinking. Well, I can tell you pretty much what they're thinking. Oh my God, I can't send it back. My life has changed. I'll grant you, they have more nannies, but their kids also have more threats to their lives. But every new parent, every new father on the way out of the hospital goes, oh my God, I'm not the youngest generation. And I can't send this child back. I have to do my best. And if we go into masonry saying, oh my God, I'm a new Mason, I need to do my best. And we need to support that man in doing his best and doing his own work. What I needed to learn in masonry, Cameron, is likely different than what you needed to learn. Same ritual, same lodge, different piece of work depending on when we join the craft and where we're at in our lives.
Yeah, it's amazing. Masonry is one of those things that's both very universal and very personal, right? If everybody kind of takes something different from it, but all the ritual work and stuff is done the same. That's what makes it so fascinating, right? It's the same words, the same work, but interpreted differently by everybody who hears it, everybody who says it, and interpreted
I,
differently by different people at different times. The way I look at the work now is different than the way I looked at it when I first joined.
sure. And when I was past master, but there were a lot of young wives. So what do you do? So again, this is a story I use regularly. In 2004, somebody did the math. It wasn't me. Masonry in North America gave $1.8 million to charity per day. 365. And that's measured in American money.
Sorry, is that as of 2022 or when was that?
That was 2004. And it stops people. Oh. And then I go on to point out that's the receivable stuff that we can measure. That doesn't include the guy coming along and saying, the fire we had in Windsor, they were neighbors of mine, and we collect $250 at the lodge meeting, and we match it with district funds, and we match it with Grand Lodge funds, and we're able to help the family out with $1,000. That never gets measured.
Do you have any idea what the number might be now, 2022, in terms of amount of money given to charity per day?
Someone told me it's probably around 4.8 million.
4.8 million per day.
Yeah.
And in 2004, how much was it per day?
1.8 American.
It's gone up quite a bit.
Well, the needs have gone up quite a bit.
That's true.
And to be fair, I mean, that includes Shriners are Masons, so that includes the Shrine Hospital in the States in particular, and our one here in Canada. It includes the work of Scottish Rite and York Rite bodies.
Yeah, I mean, there's Scottish Rite Learning Centers. There's, there's a lot of different aspects to Masonic charity that, in many cases, the recipients themselves don't know it's Masonic charity or Masonic support. I mean, how many people use the Shrine hospitals that don't recognize Shrine as a Masonic body, right?
Yeah. It's not, but we're doing it for the good of the kids, not for the applause. We get enough applause.
And no, and I think people recognize that. I think Shriners and hospitals, it's one of those things that, Shrine has to be the biggest source of charitable support in North America, I would think. Shrine hospitals. I don't know what else there could be.
Significance, but don't forget every Grand Lodge puts a fair amount of money out. One thing I don't think most of us understand, a couple of years ago, I think it was last year, the year before, the Masonic Foundation of Ontario is giving $50,000 a year to the food bank so they can buy fresh food when needed, where needed, anywhere in the province. So it's no strings attached.
That's true. Yeah, no, there's a very good point, right? I guess the difference though is with Grand Lodge, every Grand Lodge has a different, I don't know if every Grand Lodge does it. I would think they would do. Every Grand Master kind of will pick for his term a charity that they want to support that year. Whereas Shrine, it's consistent across all North America, right? Every Shrine hospital is.
Sure.
That's a very good point.
Sure.
Yeah. And that's a good thing for Masons to remember too, right? When you have a new Grand Master or when there's Grand Lodge or whatever it is, take the time to check in and see, okay, what is the charity of this? What is this Grand Master's charitable endeavor, right? And what is Grand Lodge involved in this year, and what are they focused on, and what projects do they have going on? Cornerstone or whatever it is, keep focusing on them. And
this year, Every year, every DD, every district deputy grand master can have his own charity and issue charitable receipts through the Ontario Masonic Foundation.
It's a good point too. Yeah. And I think that maybe brings us to kind of the purpose behind these interviews and the candidate series. How important is it, do you think, or why do you think it's important that Masons of all levels, whether you're brand new to the craft or whether you've been around for 30 years or anywhere in between, take the time to familiarize themselves with Grand Lodge? I mean, I can speak for myself. For probably the first 5 years of my Masonic career, I didn't really know what Grand Lodge was. I heard it discussed, but I had no particular idea as to, what exactly it was or what it did or anything to that nature. I kind of had to go and learn about it on my own. But how important is it, you think, that lodges take the time to educate their members about Grand Lodge, and members take the time to learn themselves about what Grand Lodge is and how it affects their Masonic journey?
We have some reasonable communications, but I don't think they get disseminated quickly enough or clearly enough. I'm a lodge secretary. I always get once a month, just came in this week, was a communique, and it's 3 or 4 pages long. And after you get past the second page, you're almost ready to say, enough, I can't read anymore. Because, to be honest, it's written by old guys who are very text heavy. We could use some videos. We could use some education videos, virtual education. Early 2000s, there was no virtual meetings. You had to go somewhere. We could have 3 virtual meetings for how to be a good sponsor. Cameron, you and I could get together and create that little piece and have it ready to be put on the Grand Lodge website. My brother Gary Perkins and Barry, Corinthian Lodge 96, has a good piece on the interview, the committee of investigation. It should be shared more. It's a good piece. There's little things like that, which brings me back to one of my big things. I'm a big believer in more education. And I want to be careful. It's got to be on both sides. Some's academic and some of it's just good, solid, practical education. Just how do you conduct an interview? How do you work with being a sponsor? It will always vary.
And what are your thoughts in terms of the upcoming Grand Lodge communication? At least the in-person portion. It's interesting this year. We have the in-person and the virtual. But the in-person, that seems like a great opportunity for Masons to educate themselves and learn some things. You get to travel. What do you think those 2 days will be like in terms of Masonic education for the membership?
Wonderful. Just attending Grand Lodge is educational. That's where you get to meet guys from all across the province, as you well know from your own experiences. It's where you get there. The workshops are actually quite good. We shrunk Grand Lodge, which was a good idea because we're not in the 1900s now. We've moved it from the Royal York. My wife likes the Royal York, but budgets are budgets. We don't need, when we moved voting for DDGM, in other words, we don't need 23 breakout rooms for district meetings to take place. So there's no need for that space, which opens up a number of other hotels. I like the online voting personally. We're getting comfortable with it. Last year was an interesting experiment. We thought we might get more, but we got what we got. So yeah, I'm excited. I think it'll be a good event. Most Grand Lodges are only 2 days. We having a 4-day Grand Lodge, we're a bit of an outlier.
I think you're right. Yeah. Yeah. Most Grand Lodges are only 2 days. I've traveled to a bunch of them, 2 or 3, maybe some cases. Trying to think. I was in San Francisco for California's, and I think they were 2 days. Missouri, their Grand Lodge, I think was a couple days. Yeah, nah, it was strange. That was Paul Todd's thing, right? Most worshipful Grandmaster Paul Todd. I know when he was going to different Grandmaster receptions, I heard him speak a lot, and his one of his things was always the necessity of examining Grand Lodge and shortening it, and doing things with the recognition that we no longer have 100,000 members in Ontario. We have 33,000, give or take, and acting accordingly in that way. And I think the most worshipful Grandmaster, past Grandmaster, was correct in that, and apparently so, because I do remember him mentioning specifically reducing Grand Lodge from 4 days to 2, and now we have a 2-day Grand Lodge. So yeah, I think it's a good. I agree with you. I think it's a good thing.
And his successor fully agreed. Most worshipful Brother Cameron agrees with this. It's what had happened over the years is we kept adding things on. So Tuesday afternoon of Grand Lodge was the board meeting. Well, the board meeting takes place about 2 weeks before last year, and it was virtual. We can do that now. And then because they met on a Tuesday, people would be moving in on a Monday. So people started attaching some activity Monday night. We got to get rid of, as I call, local customs and focus on what matters and shorten it down a bit. I love Toronto, but I don't necessarily want to be in downtown Toronto for 4 days.
And downtown Toronto may not want us for 4 days, but other places might. This brings the the idea of traveling, a traveling Grand Lodge or moving Grand Lodge, which I talked about a lot last year, actually, in the 2021 series. We're still in the GTA, but do you have any thoughts, and what thoughts might you have? Do you think this might foretell a more mobile Grand Lodge, and perhaps we may see it outside the GTA altogether, and perhaps the communication in Ottawa or London, or maybe even down here in beautiful Windsor, Ontario?
Sure. There's no reason it couldn't happen. There are some issues. GTA Toronto's going to have a certain pull simply because it's kind of halfway between Kingston, the east end of the province, and Windsor, the west end of the province. And if you draw that arc circle using the measurements, 4 hours out east and west and 4 hours north, you cover a great deal of us. That's just geography. We can't get around that. I wouldn't be surprised if we moved it to a hotel next to the airport at some point. So those that are visiting from across the country, from across the world, can fly into the airport, take the airport or the hotel, and it's all quite dense packed. Royal York was based upon trains 150 years ago, but we now would base it upon plane routes. And yeah, you can fly into Ottawa. Why not have it in Ottawa? Great cities, some great venues. Been to a couple of conventions there. Not a problem with me. There are some other cities that just won't have the hotel capacity. But that could change in 10 years.
It could, and a lot of it might also, capacity issues might depend on what we're seeing this year. I'm curious as to what I don't know if you've heard anything just off the cuff, or have got any notions as to what we might expect in terms of in-person attendance at, because I mean, how many people went to Grand Lodge just to vote and are not gonna didn't attend any of the sessions. Now that you can vote, now that voting is virtual, are they still gonna, you got one coming, I'm gonna be there, but I don't know if you've heard
Yes.
anything about anybody else, or if you have any ideas to numbers, but that might give a good guess as to what type of hotel capacity will be needed in future.
Well, last year the numbers didn't vary much at all on
In
voting,
in terms
so
of
that
voting.
gives you some indication. Hmm?
So the voting didn't change much last year with virtual.
Yeah, yeah, we don't. And so instead of having the guys come in on the bus, I'm sure Windsor, I know Windsor has a bus. I know London had buses, Ottawa had buses. They would come in, have a sandwich bun in the hospitality suite. So focus the education sessions in that time instead of hospitality suites.
Yeah,
There
hospitality
will
would
be
be fun, but
hospitality suites available. I see that they're renting those out. You got to talk to the Sheraton. Um, I expect it to be about the same, maybe a little bit more. But yeah, the guys coming in on the bus. If I'm 85 years old and I'm got some illness, do I want to ride in a bus from Windsor just to vote when I could vote at home?
yeah.
And if that's all I do is vote, I think I'll stay home and vote.
And yeah,
I think virtual voting will change a little bit too.
like we'll see more people taking advantage of it, or
Personally, maybe it's a hybrid model, but I'd like to see the ability to go vote in your local lodge on a computer that's been set up and you just go in and vote. For those that are not computer savvy.
well, I mean, it's gonna make things easier in a sense. I remember last year, Grand Lodge saying, if somebody wanted to vote but wasn't comfortable, the secretary had to go out with like a laptop and show them how to do it or something to that effect. And there was all sorts of talk about like, what if they're nervous about COVID, and having a central location.
I did it. I did it. But yeah, I think we should you could vote at home. I think you give the boys that option. But it might be fun as a district to say, not only that, but we're going to set up a couple of computers and we'll show you how to key in the numbers. And then you can go vote.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to do it, and might help with at least one meeting's attendance. A good reason to come out.
Yeah, I was a lodge secretary here, and see Grand Lodge last year again. And I had this discussion. So if I look at my life membership account, I have members in Kearney. I have members in Florida. I have members in Alberta. I'm not going to take my laptop over to help those guys vote. So is there a way to make it better? Yeah, I think we'll improve that system. But what we did last year worked very, very well, and it will work better as we go through and fine tune it.
Everything does, right? Just takes time.
Yep. Yeah, it's good to do. So that was I know I won't stay at the hotel because I live 16 minutes away.
So yeah, no need to stay at the hotel. I'll be staying at the hotel. I got my room booked. So I was just it'll be fun though, I'm sure.
It's a great hotel. I stayed there before.
I'm looking forward to it, and I hope this is the start of some much needed, I think, but important and good changes to the Grand Lodge annual communication format. So I'm all for the changes this year.
Which I suppose brings me to a bit of the question. As we elect a new board, which I'm letting my name stand for, we also need to make sure we get a board that's willing to acknowledge and not throw out the past, but is willing to adapt to changes in the future. Sometimes we get so hepped up on anniversaries, 100 years, 150 years, 50-year pin. What do we say to the master or the member? Maybe we should have a 5-year pin. The research was done by the Grand Master Oklahoma. I was at that talk. It was a virtual talk. And they found that half the members demitted in the first 5 years.
Demitted in what way? Like
Left the lodge.
no, I mean demitted as in sent a letter saying I'm demitting from Freemasonry, or demitted as in didn't pay their dues and just the lodge, eventually suspended them for
A
non-payment.
lot of them went NPD. Well, if I'm not happy, I just don't pay my dues. No, I don't worry about the consequences.
Yeah.
I'm leaving the craft.
Because they're not
Again,
quite...
we talk about having before a brother leaves, let's have an interview with him. Let's create a series of questions. And I'm saying it's too late then. Let's ask him after his 3rd degree how he's feeling. Let's ask him after his 3rd year, 5th year. How's it working out? What can we do to adjust to make your experience better?
Yeah, because demitting, I do think there's a big difference. I think we don't talk about it enough. I think there's a big difference between demitting due to like sending a letter saying I am demitting from lodge for these reasons, because then at least you have something where you can go, oh, he's demitting because he's moving for work and he can no longer be part of this lodge, but he's going to join a lodge over there. Or, he's demitting because of health reasons, or whatever it is. Like he's demitting because he got pissed off and he misinterpreted the apron charge to mean if he's angry, he has to leave and he doesn't understand what it really means. There's that, but at least that gives the lodge something to work with. And I think in a way it's better because it at least shows the brother cares enough about the lodge to tell them what's going on. And we can try to work something out, versus the far more common and I think dangerous type of demitting, which is one basically demitting out of apathy. Just, I'm not going to pay my dues. I'm not going to attend. And, I'll just let the lodge deal with it, because then you have no idea. It shows an apathy towards Freemasonry, that it's crept into that brother somewhere.
So I would suggest some of the other things. Look at the lodge room. How many times do you see that the people that move and second them are the principal officers sitting around in the big chairs? Why couldn't we have a member, I move that we pay our bills and accounts? But the junior warden jumps up to do it. And senior warden seconds it. And then the senior warden moves something and the junior warden seconds it.
So do you think that that's where that apathy comes from? Like,
I think that's where it starts.
yeah, they come to lodge and
we're conveying there's 2 groups in the lodge room.
They come to lodge, they're not able to vote on a motion or second a motion because principal officers do it. And then they just go, okay, they're not interested in me. And then they just stop showing up. And nobody chases them down or tries to get in touch. That's why they're not showing up. And then they don't pay their dues. And then we just,
And they go to a GP meeting with a great idea and some old past master just shuts them down. And they leave. We're a voluntary group of individuals. We're not being paid to be here. So if I get my best, present my best foot forward with an idea, a project, a way to go forward on something, and the old guy who's a right worshipful brother or something shuts me down, Third time he shuts me down, I'll walk out the door. And I think that's what happens.
And
Again, I liken it. If I surveyed all the lodge building corporations, what will we have a committee of for all our Masonic buildings across the province? How can we make the building accessible to our seniors with ramps and elevators and all that sort of stuff? Parking spots, all of that. If I asked a lodge building, what have you done to make this building more accommodating for young new members? I'm unaware that any lodge building has that committee.
no, and that's a very good point. Do you?
I function out of a great building in London, beautiful shape. I suggested back going through the chairs 2000, we should hardwire the building for internet. Nothing happened. Nothing has still happened. Why do we need that? Again, if we want to rent the rooms out during the week, when the building's empty, any business wants to have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth capability if they're going to rent the space. But those are the young members. There's no committees to talk about that.
No, I agree. I get it. I've seen the same thing happen with multiple different locations and lodges and yeah, you need both. You need to make sure that the young guys are and active and they some of their stuff gets through and they're active parts, because if they don't show up, that's a lot of time and effort. It's not easy putting on a first degree or a second degree or a third degree, right? And if they don't feel welcome, then that's a lot of work done by the lodge. It's been wasted basically, because you no longer have that Mason. So not just doing the work, it's investing in it after the fact and before, making sure the guys know what they're getting into and the sponsors know what they're sponsoring, what it means to sponsor.
Cameron, I promoted the idea in London that we have a TV, flat screen at the front door, when lodge meetings are during the week. We still have the madman office sign, probably out of London Life, with the black and the little white letters that stick in from the 1960s. And of course, now we've reduced lodges and we've reduced Yorkite bodies. And so there's fading. So you can see that we're a diminishing crowd.
Yeah. And I will say, Windsor Masonic Temple has Wi-Fi and all that stuff. A lot of work done by Gord Lawton. And it's great. I think it makes the building a lot more friendly for members and for potential outside groups who want to rent it. And it's one of those things that makes sense to do. And having a TV, having those things, I think lodges, buildings, I should say, Masonic buildings need to look into those touches, because they do improve the lodge experience and the building experience, which is what, why would you want to make the experience as enjoyable as you possibly can. It's work and it should be work, but it should be a place you want to be as well.
And I get it. Your lodge has a slide projector. Remember what those are?
Yeah. Well, we have a slide projector here, but we also have a TV, which we've used for presentations before.
Again, in a shared building, I'm saying let's get a projector in there that could be used in the little blue or the big blue room or the big red room. So we can, with Bluetooth and Wi-Fi capacity, because that's the current standard.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right.
We've got slide projector, Tom.
No, I've heard many of the same things. I think you're 100% correct in
And so
that.
what are we going to adapt? Because if we're always, it always seems to the young guy, well, we're catering to that guy that's having trouble with walking, and we should welcome brothers in. But having said it's not an either or, it's a both and equation.
Absolutely. Both and. It's a good improv rule, or I think yes and is the improv rule, but it's a good rule for improv and it's a good rule for Freemasonry and probably a good rule for life at that. And with
And
that,
historically, though, we will get better because historically, after pandemics, wars, World War I, World War II, the other various wars, masonry is always growing after a situation like this.
I don't know. I don't know. This is a good place. This is a good last question, I think. Like I've heard that, and I don't know if that's completely true. So it was true after World War One, and it was true after the Spanish flu, which kind of was part of World War One or contemporaneous. And
Yeah.
it was true of World War Two. But then, to my knowledge, you didn't see an increase in membership in North America after the Vietnam War, which Canadians were involved with. And I think if I recall correctly, the Vietnam War, you had as many American losses as you did in World War II. I think more actually. So that was a kind of a major battle. And at least in America, you didn't see an increase in membership. You actually saw a decrease in membership after the end of the Vietnam War. I don't think you saw an increase in membership after 9/11, which could be another kind of universal recent crisis. Um, we are seeing, from what I understand anecdotally, an increase in applicants. But even that, I'm
Yeah.
not sure if that's actually real or like illusory. Because if you dam up a river for 2 years and then, take the dam away, it's going to seem like that river is really
Flow.
rushing quite quickly. But
That's true. The question is, what do we do at the end of that flow?
so I guess my question is, do you think that 2022 is similar enough to 1921 and say 1950 that we're going to see that increase? Or do you think we're more similar to perhaps the end of the Vietnam War or 9/11, where I guess, do you think the times are similar enough that World War One and World War II, we can take lessons from those things and the Spanish flu pandemic, and we'll see, 2020 reflect what we saw in 1920.
Yeah. Well, in many ways, the Vietnam War was a bit of an outlier because it was also. So I'll illustrate this. I can trace masonry in my mother's side of the family in North America to 1760. A lot of stuff. But my mother was adamant with the women's lib that her husband was not going to join a men's group, period. My dad didn't become a Mason. My grandfather was a Mason. My grandpa's side of the family, 3 of my great grandfathers were masters of their lodge in Elmer. My great great grandfather who fought in the War of 1812 was a Mason. But my mother was adamant in the 60s that there should be no men only groups. And I think that hurt the craft because I think one of the things we're suffering from is the lack of guys in their 60s, of which I'm one. I didn't join till my kids were old enough to look after themselves because I thought when they're little, I'll wait. Do I think I think the pandemic has really had us say, I love family. And I come to the realization I might not have them the way I thought I would. And that gives us pause to think I need to have a community to support me. And that I think is just, I could say, tale of two cities, tale of two communities. Right before we moved to Kitchener, My wife is a full-time Lutheran pastor. She had a heart attack on Boxing Day. But when they let her out, we had to go to heart education. And I said, what about travel? And the nurse educator said, Arizona, Florida. I said, no, Thailand next Monday. We didn't go. And then she said, we went over and saw the cardiologist. And he said, you'll need a cardiologist in Kitchener. And we said, we got one, Dr. Renner. That came through the church circle community. And he says, you'll need a GP. I said, we got one, Dr. Cameron. That came through the Masonic fraternity. Community and fraternity and supporting one another really works. And it lifts us up and gives us more confidence to move forward. And when they really tick you off, Cameron, love your brother even more.